library. This is a hybrid event to allow for in-person programming while honoring those who can't or prefer not to participate in person or need to participate remotely. We'll be recording the session and posting it on the library YouTube channel as well. This is a safe environment where you can choose to wear a mask or not, sit next to each other or not, move the seats around wherever it makes you comfortable. Sasha may choose not to wear a mask because projecting is difficult, and that's typically the way it's been for our speakers. They've gone without their masks. Restrooms are available in the back on the right. All of you at home know where yours are. Big thanks to the Friends of the Library for their generous support and all of our programming. So this evening, I'll do a brief introduction. Sasha will do a reading. We'll have some discussion, Q&A, closing, and then book sales and signing in the back. Thanks very much to Darvels for attending. We have some upcoming events in May that you might be interested in. It's funny, Amanda Swinimer is coming on Sunday, and she's a self-described Pacific Northwest mermaid. And if you read Sasha's book, you'll know how much she wanted to be a mermaid. So I thought that was very cute. And next Thursday, we have an online event with Erden Arust. He opened our endurance speaker series back in October as he was rowing across the Pacific. He made landfall in the Philippines. He's back in Seattle, and he'll be closing out the endurance series, which is very poetic. Sunday, the 15th, we have drop-in chess. Sunday, the 15th, we also have family game night. And then Thursday, May 26th, we have Gene Helfman from Lopez coming over. He wrote a book called Beyond the Human Realm, a novel about orca whales. And then we're probably going to be going on a bit of a hiatus in the summer. We will have summer book program, and we'll also be having Roseanne Perry come as part of Orcas Lit Fest. So there will be some things going on. When I first read about Sasha in the issue of the Seattle Times devoted to local women during Women's History Month last March. And I learned that she's a poet, musician, creative writer from the Upper Skagit and Nooksack Indian tribes. Her memoir, Red Paint, the Ancestral Autobiography of a Coast Salish Punk, was printed March 8th by Counterpoint Press, and it recounts her childhood as the great-granddaughter and namesake of a prominent Lushootseed linguist and storyteller, the nomadic nature of her teens, surviving trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, and finding love, hope, resilience, and beauty in her own life and the lineage of the women she's descended from. And I thought Orcas needs to hear this woman's story. So I asked her to come, and I was delighted when she enthusiastically agreed. I sat down to familiarize myself with Sasha's work. I thought I'd be skimming the book, dipping in here and there, getting an idea what it was about. And I went to check it out, but it was already checked out from our library. I went to check it out from Libby. It was already checked out on Libby. So I bought the Kindle version, and 5 hours later, I resurfaced. Her work resonated with me on two levels. First, emotionally, I've been struggling myself with how to connect with one of my daughters, and her work opened up some space in my heart and psyche that might actually help heal some old wounds. And then geographically, I'd visited nearly all the places she mentioned, from Astoria to Bellingham. I thought I knew them. But her memoir allowed me to see these places with new eyes from the perspective of a Native woman with really deep roots in the Pacific Northwest. And at its essence, her book, for me, is about home, about finding home within yourself, as well as where you rest your head. And right now, we're resting our heads on Orcas Island. And using slightly altered language developed by the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, let us acknowledge we are inhabiting a colonized space, the ancestral lands and waters of the Coast Salish people, who have called this place home since time immemorial, and let us honor inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights that have been passed down from generation to generation. So with that, let me now welcome Sasha LaPointe to the stage. I was like, stage.
Twa Wilapu de Ishad, Eschalchu, CEM, CIAF, Takshablu, Seedsta, Twa Nooksack, Gwal, Skagit. Hello, I'm Sasha Takshablu LaPointe, and I'm honored to be here. I'm from the Coast Salish tribes of Nooksack and Upper Skagit. And thank you so much, Carol, for your interest in my work. When I got the invitation, I was very enthusiastic. Growing up on Swinomish, I I spent some time coming to Orcas, and I think in a conversation earlier today, we were talking about the last couple times I had been here. And as a teenager, I remember this really big event for a skate park opening here, and they had bands and they had like skate demos, and I had come with a friend and we camped in her van, and it was amazing. And I was like, I love Orcas, so I'm so happy to be back. I will say this just to get it out of the way. I tend to drink a lot of water while I'm reading and speaking, so it's a little bit awkward, but I just have to do it because bodies are weird and anxiety is weird, and I need to drink water about it. But thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to read 3 excerpts from the book, one at the beginning, one towards the middle, and one at the end. It's kind of just like the red paint set list right now, so it just kind of gives you some moments of the story. And then happy to chat and answer questions. So the first is from Naming Ceremony. There is a photograph of me at my naming ceremony, small in a blue dress, mess of brown ringlets falling around my face as I teeter precariously close to the edge of a picnic table. The photo was taken in 1986. I am 3 years old. My arm is outstretched as if reaching for someone out of frame, and I'm smiling. I'd like to think it was my great-grandmother, just out of reach, coming to gather her namesake up in her arms, but there is no way of knowing. It could have been my mother. It could have been anybody. I have white socks with ruffles and strappy shoes. You can tell from the photo that my mother wanted me to look nice. You can also tell by the grin on my face that moments after the photo was taken, I would be barefoot, that my dress would be streaked in grass stains. When remembering that day, my mother sighs, laughs a little, and says, I looked across the yard and saw you on the table dancing next to a boombox, and I just knew you were going to be a handful. That day, relatives passed me along in their arms. As uncles tended to the fire, as the salmon baked, friends and family tousled my hair, pinched my cheeks, and said things like, Takshablut number 2, and what hard shoes to fill. I like to think my great-grandmother knew what she was doing that day, that she knew the counter curse I would someday need. Like the fairy godmother in Sleeping Beauty, who saved her gift for last and passed to the sleeping princess the only thing that could wake her. As a child, I would long for what princesses possessed: magic, courage, enchanted slippers, and the love of brave princes. I would come to yearn for new worlds and ways to escape. What I wouldn't realize was the magic my great-grandmother passed down. And it wasn't true love's kiss. It wasn't a prince. It wasn't a spell or a slipper. It was a name, Takshablu, like an incantation, Tak-sha-blue. It comes from deep in me, travels through parted lips out into the world and stays there. Water break. And this next section is from the chapter Spirit Sickness. I had been sick several years ago when we lost my great-grandmother. As her namesake, I felt part of myself try to leave with her to the spirit world. Brandon had also been with me then. The last time I saw my great-grandmother was in the middle of a terrible snowstorm. My mother had called me at work. You need to be here now. I quickly untied my apron and ran out of the restaurant. Brandon and I had been dating for a year. He offered to drive me. My grandmother's house was an hour north of the city. I was panicked the entire way. The farther we got from Seattle, the more treacherous the storm became. Just outside of the Swinomish Reservation, a semi-truck was jackknifed on the highway ahead of us. Brandon knew how to handle his truck in the snow, but his skill did little to calm my anxiety. The snow piled on the windshield. There was a silence in the cab of the truck that can only occur in winter, when snow mutes the world. The only sound was the swoosh of the windshield wipers, bringing the highway back into view again and again. I sucked in a shallow breath and my lungs felt rushed. He asked if I had my inhaler. I did. I closed my eyes and pressed my head against the window. I tried to imagine that the world on the other side was safe. The afternoon I first introduced Brandon to my great-grandmother, he was shy and I had to scoot him forward to shake her hand. Her eyes were already bad then, and he had to get close. She looked up at me and asked, "What color is he, dear?" "Grandma," I said, embarrassed, "you can't say that." She just chuckled and held his hand in hers. "Is he a nice Indian boy?" "Grandma," I tried to hush her, but the room was already laughing. "No, Grandma, Brandon is not native." I looked sheepishly to my new, now terrified boyfriend. "Well, as long as he doesn't bore you." She released his hand and smiled warmly in his direction. "Don't you bore my great-granddaughter. She's my namesake." The room was full of family members and laughter. Even Brandon looked suddenly at ease. But some part of me retreated. Some part of me questioned if I was somehow losing something. Was I disappointing her because I'm part white, because I'm dating a white man? Am I becoming less Indian? Would I lose my Indianness completely? I thought of our someday children. I thought of them unable to enroll in our tribe. I thought of them never meeting their great-great-grandmother or hearing our tribe stories in our traditional language. In the truck, my breath fogged patterns on the glass. A transformer somewhere above exploded, raining electric blue sparks down onto the white world. Cars alongside the freeway sunk into the snow. I rocked back and forth and sucked in air. I kept my eyes closed until I couldn't take it anymore. My hand shot towards the handle. Stop the truck. My chest sputtered with asthma and my heart drummed. This isn't safe. Look at those cars. Nobody is driving out here. Nobody is on the road. In the cab of the truck, I was a wide-eyed and feral thing. Brandon put the child lock on and calmly touched my shoulder, but I was angry. Mad at him like he was somehow causing the snow. Mad at him for offering to brave the roads. Mad at him like he somehow had control over anything. "We have to keep going," he said. "We're so close." I knew he was right, and he knew it wasn't the snow I was afraid of. He knew that in 20 minutes we would arrive. I rode the rest of the way with my head in my hands. I didn't want to see the mile markers, the familiar farms, the channel, the recognizable world of my childhood blanketed in white. With my eyes closed, I thought of her voice, the low, guttural sounds of our traditional language. I remembered the stories she told when I was growing up. I remembered the last meal we shared, oysters. Brandon safely pulled the truck in front of my great-grandmother's home. We're here. I sat with my hand on the door, watching the snow fall in the streetlight. Brandon walked around the truck and opened the door, and I fell out into the cold night against him. We walked up the icy steps, and my mom opened the door. Inside, everything glowed warm and orange. Cedar baskets lined the walls of my great-grandmother's small apartment, and candles burned pink lights around us. Here we were, 4 generations of women, my mother, my grandmother, me, and my great-grandmother, who looked small and frail. I lingered in the doorway with a lump in my throat, unable to move my legs until Brandon guided me slowly toward the pull-out sofa where my great-grandmother lay dying. She had been teaching Lushootseed again. Books and papers were scattered around the apartment. Lushootseed words scribbled in marker, big and black, filled yellow legal pads. My great-grandmother wore a purple terry cloth robe, and I noticed how it matched the Gatorade that my mom delicately lifted to her face. She sipped slowly, then lay back down. My mom motioned for me to come closer, and I did, lying down beside my great-grandmother on the mattress. Quiet filled the room. Not the cold silence beyond the window of winter or snow-covered mountains, but the silence of how I imagined the buds of flowers must be before they open. Looking at the pink glow from the candlelight, the orange cedar of the baskets, and the purple liquid gleaming in the small glass of my great-grandmother's lips, I thought of spring. Her fingers wrapped around mine delicately, the skin translucent like petals. Outside, the world was white and frozen, but inside, I looked at the faces of the women in the room, 4 generations all huddled quietly in the warmth. It felt like a hearth. It felt like abundance. You should really get going, dear. My mom looked out the window, then to Brandon. It's not going to stop. I glared at the window at the snow already piling on the hood of the truck. Brandon looked concerned. He mentioned to my mom and grandmother that I'd panicked in the truck, that I tried to open the door on the freeway. I didn't want to let go of my great-grandmother's hand and started to feel my breath go shallow again. With help, I stood. My grandmother hugged me, then my mother. They gave me a small, white pill for the ride home. It's for anxiety, my grandmother told me. I looked down at the thing in my hand, then back to my great-grandmother and nodded. Outside, Brandon helped me to the truck. He fastened my seatbelt. I pulled his hand close and held it. All I could mutter was thank you. The roads twisted and curved through the snow-covered farm flats. In springtime, these fields were lined with rows of primary colored tulips, attracting carloads of tourists. I wondered what indigenous flowers grew in this valley before the land was colonized. I tried to imagine what the land must have looked like when my great-grandmother was a girl, before dikes and farmhouses. I'll never hear her tell me a story in Lushootseed again, I said while staring out the window. I looked at the white pill in the palm of my hand, bit it in half, and tasted the bitter, metallic flavor on my tongue. I got the call somewhere outside of Everett. She's gone. My mom's voice dissolved through the phone and the drug in my bloodstream. I didn't cry. Instead, I swallowed the other half of the pill. I leaned my head against the window and stared at the winter beyond, widening out the world. I closed my eyes and hoped for sleep. I tried not to think of the long wait ahead, of waiting out winter. I tried to tell myself that spring was just around the corner. My spirit left me then. For many days, all I did was sleep. I called into work. I kicked the covers away from my body. I tossed and turned. The curtains weren't dark enough, so I learned to ignore the daylight. Some mornings, I heard Brandon at the stove, heating water for tea, trying to get me to eat. I could almost get to him. I could almost get back to the world. But a wave would crash over me and my room would fill with water again and again, reminding me I was still asleep. Never waking, I got lonely. I chased a speck of paint like a white rabbit across the bedroom wall, convinced if I followed it long enough, it would lead me back to the waking world. But my eyes were too heavy, and I lost the speck of paint again and fell deeper into slumber. I slept days and weeks away. I slept my body sore. I slept through several bill cycles, and eventually my mother called. You can't sleep like that, she told me. You need to see a healer, a medicine worker. You need to wake up. In the months that followed, my mother took me to see our medicine worker, the same one who had been with us at great-grandmother's burning ceremony. Burning ceremonies are done to help prepare those we have lost for their journey to the spirit world. We burn their clothes, their belongings, their favorite food, anything that might help them on their way. Great-grandma was hanging out, reluctant to pass on, reluctant perhaps to leave us. So we had gathered in the field behind her house at the fire pit. My uncle and father stoked a bonfire while people inside the house prepared food. As we stood around the fire waiting for the ceremony, my dad put his arm around me. Crazy, he said. Isn't it strange that just 50 years ago, we'd be arrested for this, charged with witchcraft? When the ceremony started, I was stable, sturdy, and standing upright. I was strong and able to face it. But by the time the song started, I began to feel weak. I began to tremble. I saw plates of food stacked onto the fire and burning away. I saw salmon, potato salad, and fry bread as it blackened and disappeared. I saw my mother bent over the fire, carefully pouring a tiny glass of purple Gatorade into the flames. She did this as gently as she had when she brought it to my great-grandmother's lips the night she died. Something in me gave out. Like a string that had been pulling me upright had snapped. Like a marionette cut down, I fell. The world went cold. It was winter. It was cold. But all of a sudden, the cold got inside me, found its way into my bones. I shivered as I fell apart next to the fire. I desperately wanted to yank the sweaters, the plates of food, her belongings, things she had touched, one by one, from the fire and cling to them, to hold them to my chest, to clutch their warmth until they turned to ash in my hands. I frantically looked around the field for my great-grandmother. I was sure she would come for me, to collect me, to take me away with her, because surely I had died out here. But no spirit came for me. The medicine worker had witnessed this. He had felt her spirit clinging to me the way they sometimes do. If they stay too long, he explained, you can get very sick. The work he did on me was to help her move on, to help me move on. After seeing the healer, my mom and I drove home from the tribal center. She reminded me that I come from a long line of strength. Grandma, I asked, still feeling her absence in my chest when I said it aloud. And Aunt Susie? My mom nodded, but she also reminded me about the woman called Kamsha. Years earlier, my mom had told me the story of a woman who lived on the southern coast of Washington. Kamsha fled her village following a smallpox epidemic that had claimed the lives of her loved ones. Alone for the first time, she married a settler, a Scottish sea captain of the Hudson Bay Trading Company. The captain had learned that any white settler marrying an Indian woman received twice the allotment of land, though she was not permitted to live in the same house. He made her a small shack with a dirt floor, 4 walls, and 1 window. How strong would you have to be to survive something like that? My mom asked it aloud, but I didn't answer. That's when she reminded me that Kamsha's blood was my blood. You're a direct descendant. But that night, as I trembled in bed, as the record still spun, as the rain hammered down, as my fiance brushed the sweat and hair from my face, I felt far away from my body. Whatever strength supposedly coursed through my veins was dormant. If I had something inside of me at all, it was hidden, out of reach. And I'll just finish with a short excerpt from the chapter called Dead Man's Cove, towards the end of the book. I visited the town's small library next. There I discovered that Kamsha and Captain James Johnson were considered the first family of Ilwaco. In an old historical society's reference book, I learned the captain had died at sea. That's all it said. Captain James Johnson died at sea. Next, I read about a place called Dead Man's Cove. I knew I had to go. Through the density of the forest came the sound of waves against rocks. Pan and I quickened our pace. The tree line opened up and revealed a steep cliffside. Beneath the drop-off, waves roared against massive black rocks jutting out from the blue depths of the cove. Dead Man's Cove was picturesque. The water, a dark, clean blue. Sword ferns and trees grew along the climbing stones. The water raged, sending tall waves and sprays of sea foam into the trees. This part of the coast, where the Columbia meets the ocean, is known as the Graveyard of the Pacific. Over 2,000 ships have gone under here. Beneath the beauty of the surface lie pile upon pile of wrecked ships, a cemetery of drowned men, decaying boats, nameless explorers. Perhaps this was where the captain met his demise, right here in Dead Man's Cove. I watched the ocean beat itself against the beach and said a silent thank you. Perhaps the ocean had been looking out for my ancestors as it claimed one ship after another. Perhaps it was trying to keep them safe. The men who sailed here brought disease and gold and alcohol. They brought treaties and names for places already named. They crossed an ocean to climb these shores, and the water pulled them under when it could, to keep the land as it was, even if only for a moment longer. I paid my respects not to the men lost at sea, but to the sea itself, the power beneath the waves. Thank you. Stay here.
I have any questions? I certainly have 2 from online already.
Oh, fun.
I'll go and start those. You guys can think. Boyd Pratt asks if you could speak to the resonance of red paint, significance in use of red paint.
So red paint in my Coast Salish culture is referring to Coast Salish Longhouse ceremonies. And so I come from a family of people who danced in the longhouse who wore red paint during the ceremonies. And the red paint was the mark of the healer, the medicine workers.
And also, he asks your opinion. He asks your opinion and what influence Joe Harjo. Am I saying that?
Joy Harjo?
Joy Harjo may have had, poet, musician, punkish, may have had on you.
Joy Harjo is a force, is incredible. Like, oh my gosh, like dream goals to meet her someday. She's performed, and I've heard her read. I went to school at the Institute of American Indian Arts and was lucky enough to see her perform, play saxophone, read her amazing poetry. She's so cool. And her memoir, Crazy Brave, I read in my MFA program and loved it. I mean, so yeah, there's definitely some fierce influence there that I'm grateful for.
I was thinking about the significance of the women as you were talking, your great grandmother and your grandmother and mother and you. And it sounded like you had such a connection to your great grandmother. I was wondering if that came down through the other women as well, through your grandmother and your mother as well.
Are you speaking about my relationship to my mother and grandmother, or my great grandmother's relationship to both of them?
Actually, both would be an interesting question.
I mean, definitely the relationship between my mom and grandmother was strong. Like growing up, I spent a lot of time with my other grandmother. I remember spending chunks of time in the summer at her apartment in Seattle, and like we definitely had like a connection. And of course, my mom and I, but for some reason, even as a little tiny baby, like kid running around our beach property and like camping, we did big family camping trips, even as a tiny child, before I really understood who my great grandmother was in the context of everything. I was just very like glued to her. I would follow her around, and like, I think I once sat her down on a family camping trip, and I knew she was a storyteller, right? She always told these beautiful stories at gatherings, and I just thought she was the coolest. And I must have been like 6 or something. But I sat her down next to the campfire, and I was like, I'm a storyteller too. And I sat down and I recited verbatim, like play by play, every single word of The Little Mermaid, like the songs and everything. And she just sat there like a patient, amazing grandmother would, and was like, okay. So for some reason, that bond was really, really strong, even as a small kid. And her and my mom were very close as well. Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's such a funny word to put on the cover of a book. But I think that for me, it has several different meanings. And I think that discovering music at such a young age, when I was feeling very isolated, very trapped in this place, you know, in the middle of the woods in this tiny trailer. Sometimes we didn't have power. Like, it was a very isolating experience to be a young kid in at times, beautiful at times, but also hard. And I can remember very vividly being a little preteen and having already experienced trauma and gone through some really hard things. And on top of just being in the middle of the woods and being a kid, like on top of that, like I felt, I think, more isolated and alone and confused. And I remember stealing my brother's boombox and dragging it into the bathroom, which was the only place I could have privacy. And I would listen for hours to the college radio station or the alternative station. And I was just very quickly enamored with it. And I remember the first time ever hearing a Bikini Kill song. And of course, I'd missed, the Riot Girl movement as it was happening because I was 10. But a few years later, I discovered it, and I remember making mixtapes like on the floor of that bathroom, and like it just resonating with me so hard. And it was the first time I had ever heard a song that kind of spoke to some things that I had experienced, and I was like, whoa, you can sing about this stuff, you can talk about this stuff, and you can do it like really angrily and like fiercely. And so that was kind of like a gateway into, then I opened up a world of other music, and eventually I started going to Seattle and like going to see shows and making friends with punks and like, you know, finding that world. And it had like such a positive, like safe, like place for me in it. At times, I'm like, if we're gonna critique the punk, I'm like, we could be here forever. I mean, what I found in it was pretty necessary and needed. Like, but then also someone asked me this really interesting question a few weeks ago at an event, and it was so cool. She was like, how does the word punk and what it means to you like connect with all that you talk about, like learning from your ancestors and like these amazing women of your lineage? Like is there ever an intersection there? And I was so excited by this question. I was like, actually, yes. Like growing up and seeing my great grandmother's work around language revitalization, language preservation, like it felt very punk. Like she was an activist. She was like saving this language from extinction, from erasure, and in that way, like sort of fighting against these like systems of oppression and erasure. And I thought that was very cool. So punk has all of these different weird meanings in the book. But yeah, I kind of just rambled a lot, but hopefully I answered. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on any of the music that did inspire you, other than the punk stuff, any specific bands or anything that inspired you?
Mm-hmm. Wait, outside of punk?
No.
Oh, okay. Just yeah.
That genre of music, any of the bands that inspired you to write?
Yeah. And this is going to sound terribly cliche, being a '90s kid from the Pacific Northwest, but I very much fell in love with Nirvana, and hearing songs that sort of explored like deep sadness and like frustration was really important to me too. And again, opening up worlds into like little gateway drugs into other music, falling down rabbit holes. So when I was young, those kind of bigger bands or that were more present led to like discovering other bands from the Northwest, like the Wipers. I really fell in love with them, from Portland. And then like nerdy goth stuff too, like Nine Inch Nails. Like I went through a very strong Nine Inch Nails phase. I remember one of the first CDs I bought ever when I was just like a tiny, like twerpy kid was the Crow soundtrack from like that 90s movie, The Crow, which was my dream. Like in my, I think 14-year-old Sasha's brain was just The Crow. And so a lot of the bands on that, yeah, like Joy Division and bands that I still really love and listen to.
Speaking about the Clash.
Clash is great. Clash is fun. I like to put them on at a party, you know, they're fun.
We have a question from Darcy Leach. You wrote of the sea potentially claiming those ships to protect your people and the land from the colonists. Do you think nature still has the power to protect itself from humans? What do the Swinomish believe about that notion that the earth sometimes acts to put us humans in our place?
Oh,
Well,
that is a heavy and amazing one. Like, I think this person has a great question and kind of answered it like in the question. But also I would like to differentiate or like be specific. I'm not Swinomish. I grew up on the Swinomish reservation, but I'm Nooksack and Upper Skagit. So I can't speak to what the Swinomish specifically believe, though we are, you know, Coast Salish tribes. But what an amazing and terrifying and very like poignant question. And I think that there's in this idea of the sea kind of trying to protect, you know, as the way I worded it, like protecting the land for a little bit. Like I think that if that could be true for so many other areas, like it's so needed right now, of course, like, and I think that though I can't speak to specifically Swinomish, I can really, I have an understanding, at least through my family and connection to like different Coast Salish beliefs, and I think it's true across many like tribes and communities, but that before colonization and the arrival of this kind of new way, like, well, and I worry about over romanticizing and sounding like it's complicated. It's an intense question, but like, I think that a lot of indigenous belief is around balance and around, like even a perfect example is when I was young, my grandmother sort of teaching me about harvesting cedar and the way that you pull it up from the trees to harvest cedar for weaving. But I remember it really stuck with me. She was like, but you never want to stay and harvest too much. Like you have to move on. Like you can't just take from one place over and over. And I think that if that's what we as humans are doing is absolutely taking from one place over and over. And that's not an indigenous way of thinking or behaving, well, or a belief. That was a rough one, but a really important one. And I'm trying to say that, yeah. Cool.
I meant to ask about your practice. Apologize.
That's okay.
I'm not sure, I don't quite have the question formulated, but hopefully it will come out as I begin speaking. But I know, well, I will say to the rest of you, I knew her great grandmother really well. And I know that a lot of what she expressed in her life was that sense of responsibility to carry her culture. And I know that probably weighed a bit heavy on her at times, although I think she did it very well. But I just wondered if you could speak a little bit to your own sense maybe of whether that feels like a burden at times, or it did at least at other points in your life, or a kind of a mix between like just wanting to do your own thing and wanting to carry things in such a responsible way as she would have seen it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so lovely to meet a friend of hers, you know, so thank you for being here. And yeah, I think that that was such a huge part of how she lived her life and why she did the things she did, was that she felt like a responsibility to do so. And she even called it, she was like, oh, I have an assignment from the creator. Like I have this job that I have to do, or and I think that she would also give out jobs in the family where she's like, you have to, like, she would tell my mom, like, so you're going to do this. My mom would be like, oh, I didn't know that, but okay. And it was kind of like, you listened. And I think that there was a time in my young teenagehood where it did feel really overwhelming, but never a burden, even when I was just fully derailed and, you know, off the rails, like teenage homelessness, running away, like being kind of the nightmare child that I was for a bit. I would always make it a point, if I knew that there was a family gathering, even if I hadn't spoken to my own parents in like months, if I knew there was a family gathering that great grandma would be at, I knew that I had to be there, even if I had to hitchhike from Seattle or wherever I was currently, and I would be there because I knew that that was like expected of me. And so even in those moments where I would say that I was my most lost, like shaved head, like blue lipstick, just being like, I'm going to start a band, or whatever I was doing, some of it way worse than that. But she would kind of wrangle me in a way and be like, just through a simple conversation, like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm kind of up to this, and there was no like BSing her. Like she was such a force. And like, I remember even she would kind of remind me, even in the worst times when I was like a teenager and kind of like really, really off the rails, she would wrangle me and remind me, even if we didn't speak it totally out loud. I was like, oh yeah, I have to get my like stuff together, and like, you know, and I felt like there was this responsibility, and I'm so grateful for it now, you know, like she knew even then that like, hey, you have a job to do, like you have a responsibility as a Native person and like your own kind of storyteller. And she definitely reminded me and let me know. And so I don't think it ever felt like a burden. It definitely felt scary, or it felt overwhelming, but I'm so grateful for it.
So I will just say that I think that she would be very, very proud of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Right, really beautiful.
Thank you.
Boyd says, I think you mentioned going to the Institute in Santa Fe. That is amazing. Is there any question marks? Wash blossom necklace. The Southwest is so different from the Northwest. Was that region an influence on you?
I loved that region. Like, I mean, when I moved from, I've been my whole life raised in the Pacific Northwest, coastal baby, that when I uprooted myself, in fact, my ending up at the Institute of American Indian Arts was because of my great grandmother. And my mom kind of like, it was at the tail end of the dark times. And I think I was waitressing and doing some stuff in Seattle, but they kept reminding me like, hey, there's this school, you're a freaky artist. Maybe you should go check out this like tribal art college. And I was like, yeah, I'll do it later. I want to like literally go join the circus. But when my great grandmother passed away, I remember that's when it became real for me. And I was like, oh, I need to go do this. And so she's a big part of why I ended up there and decided to even go to school after many years of not being in school. And it was hard for me being a coastal baby. I remember arriving in New Mexico and being like, what is this? Like the sky is huge, there's no water. And I had never lived away from home like that. And so it was really hard, but I adjusted quickly and loved my time at IAI and met other like indigenous artists, and some are very much my best friends for life now. And it definitely shaped my writing, and like that time that I finally just said, okay, I owe it to myself to like study this thing that is so important to me, storytelling, poetry. So I feel like my time in Santa Fe was really, really special. And this squash blossom necklace was actually given to me by my grandmother. It was hers that she received from a friend. So I wear it when I have moments like this that are scary. Any other questions?
I have a question that Boyd says, wow, the answer. I'm thinking about your time off the rails, and I'm wondering if there was any reconciliation that had to occur with your mother. Was that even part of it or not? And sort of like coming back on the rails, if you will. Was that part of it or not? If so, how did that play out?
Oh man, how much time do we have?
Okay.
Short Cliff Notes version. There were multiple moments where my mom and I had to come back together. And again, I think my great grandmother like played a role in that too, because not that she was orchestrating us getting back together, but because of who she was to us, we would sort of find ourselves at family gatherings if we hadn't seen each other, like I was saying. But I think even because there were moments of like, we're not talking, or I'm super angry teen nightmare tornado. And I think that there were moments of coming back together. I had a lot of growing to do. Like I started leaving home at 14 and was living on my own in an apartment by 15. So there was big breaks, but I think we always knew that we had to come back to each other. And we both spent, I think, in that time, like growing as the humans that we are, like our relationship as mother and daughter and friends, and then just the separate identities of who we are, growing and evolving. And I think there was a lot of like learning and like care that like, it was like baby steps, I guess is the short answer, where it didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. And I think that it was really like our relationship now is super beautiful. And we walk in this place called Swan Creek every week. And she's like one of my best friends. And there was the time where we like definitely had the nightmare moments, but we came through it. And I think that it was a process.
I have like questions galore, so you guys should please find your writing, and that's me. And I just forgot the one I had, so I'll fill in anything more on.
Anybody have a fun question?
Yeah, right.
Some light ones? Yeah.
Is it, I don't know if you're prepared for it or not, but is it possible if you could read one of your poems to us before you go?
Yeah. Do you mean, oh, like from the upcoming collection? Like,
Uh-huh.
yeah. I feel like I swore I would never do this, like be the guy that reads the poem from the phone, but I can totally do that for you. Yeah, so I will grab that. And thank you for requesting a poem. It's gonna take me a second to find them, which is embarrassing. But I think that it's been really nice. One of my events a few weeks ago in April, after being on book tour, and it's so incredible. I feel very lucky and very privileged to be on a book tour and sharing this book with the world. But it can be heavy, like as we're all experiencing together. Like there's some harsh like themes here, and sometimes, and it can get kind of just like, oh wow, I'm going to talk about this book again. And at this event a couple weeks ago, the moderator was like, would you read us a poem? It's like poetry month. And I was like, oh my goodness, yes, thank you. And as I did, I felt really, it was like medicine. Like it literally was like so soothing. I was like, I miss poetry. So thank you. Now let me quickly, in a totally non-panicked way.
While you're looking,
Okay.
I'll do a little soft shoe. We have a book display up at the front that you can come look at when the library's open. And it has all kinds of books that relate to Sasha and her life, including DVDs of Twin Peaks and the Goonies.
Oh my goodness, I need to see this.
And the Goonies. I'm going to find Little Mermaid, who's up there next. And then music and some native books. And actually, on the poster right here, there's a paper back that came from our San Juan Island collection right here, San Juan County collection, I guess I should say, about the Lushootseed.
Lushootseed.
Some of the ceremonies, I think, collection there. And I think Chrissy Bryant.
Oh my God, this is awesome. This is so awesome. I'm honored. Thank
That's
you.
right. Do you need any more soft shoe or are you good?
I'm good. I found it. And I kind of love this to follow up the mom question. I was sort of frantically looking through my docs and I just found a folder called Poems for Mom. And I was like, what is that? They weren't poems I wrote for my mom or anything, but she had asked for an upcoming project for some poems. So I put together some poems, but I thought that would be a nice. So the first one in this is from the upcoming collection, Rose Quartz, but it's called Teach Me to Say I Love You. Teach me to say I love you in your language. I have forgotten how to speak. Like something caught in my throat, a fishbone broken, splintering me into something quiet, muted and star-like, lost in a sky. The word for sky is Shakolgwets. Teach me to say, just stay put, stay here, because I have forgotten how to be inside my own body. Whatever my body has become beneath your tongue, conquered and ugly, malformed and mispronounced. Teach me a word better than survivor, like watching my grandmother pour black coffee in the kitchen and the stacks of legal pads filled up with her words, and I tried to listen. The word for language is wurgwated. Teach me to say I love you, because every time I walk into a restaurant to meet a date, I hesitate. I remember the trees along Portland Avenue in their red bows, like gift packages on Christmas morning. This is to honor assault survivors. How my mother tied each one, hugging their bark in ribbon. And I think of this as he pulls the chair out, takes my jacket, pours the wine red into the glass, and asks if I am hungry. Red is what I remember when I realize he will have to take me home and learn how to unwrap me. Teach me to say I love you, because what good is a ribbon if it cannot hold us together where we have been broken? Teach me to speak in a language older than words, not of white men whose tongues touch everything. Quiet yourself and listen. Oh, Shabitsi Chud. Oh, Shabitsi Chud. Like a sigh I would make as a child, comfortable and safe, then the thud of my heart as it beats in my chest, its thrum as it drums inside my ribcage.
Sasha asks, I wonder if you'd like to talk about the different audiences you had in mind while writing this book, and if so, and if or how they influenced the story.
I mean, I definitely think that in the context of my story, I was aware and hoping for a certain audience, but I don't think there was any influence from them. And I think that that's important. It's something I try to remind like students in workshops or friends, like writers, that we can't and it's such a hard practice, but to like, when I'm writing and like just me and the page, if I'm thinking about outside influences, like what is so-and-so going to think about this? What is so-and-so going to think about this? I'll never get anything done. I'll like rip my hair out and freak out. So I have to like kick everybody out and just be alone with the page. But with that being said, when I knew I wanted to write a story about, and not just like a trauma narrative or a catalog of all the sad things that have happened to me as an Indigenous woman, but like I wanted to write a story specifically about healing and like how, like what it meant to heal. Who I had in mind for that, I think, was absolutely like 14-year-old me, like any kind of person that might be feeling isolated or alone in their experiences and needing to like hear that there's an other side. So that was an intended audience. Okay.
Tell us about what's coming next.
What's coming next? Doing a reading in LA next month, and then I'm working on a collection of essays. Like the poetry is coming out, Rose Quartz, March of 2023, which I'm really excited about. But also I'm working on a collection of essays. So yeah, that's next. Like writing and playing weird music, and
Do you have a gig coming up?
we don't. My bandmate is actually needing to take, I mean, we're going to write new stuff. We're going to take the time to try and write something new. But we're taking a break because she has some body stuff healing to do, but we'll be writing and making new songs. So I'm excited for that. But yeah. Yeah, so the band I reference in the memoir that I was in for several years is Medusa Stare. And then the drummer and I formed our own weird little project with just like a synth and drum machine and in the basement. It was weird. It was pandemic times, you know. And that band is called Fleur de Louve. And we did just play a show in Portland last month, and that was very fun. But now we're going to take a couple months off.
So one of your favorite movies back in the day was The Goonies. What's one of your favorite movies in the last couple of years?
This is one of those questions. It happens to me all the time where someone cool will be like, what's your favorite band? Or what are you listening to right now? And I'm like, nothing. What is music? I just blank. I'm like, I don't even listen to music. But I'm thinking.
Is that your favorite?
But something recent that I kind of love.
Maybe you would recommend, or a book you've read recently that you'd recommend.
Yes, I have several of those, or at least one. I'm still thinking of the movie. I'm like, you could do this. You love movies. You watch them all the time. But sadly, I just watch a lot of like drag race competitions, like Dragula, RuPaul's Drag Race. Those are my jam right now. Also, it's not a movie, but Reservation Dogs is phenomenal. And if anybody like hasn't seen it yet, please go watch it. It's incredible. Some folks that were, I have something to do with that show, like friends and just like total like badasses. It's really cool to see a bunch of rad natives working on a show, and it's great. So reservation dogs. Okay, I at least kind of answered that. And a book that I love that I recently reread again is by Kawai Strong Washburn, who's a writer from Hawaii and wrote this beautiful novel called Sharks in the Time of Saviors. It's like one of my favorite novels, I think, of all time. I keep giving it away and then rebuying it, and then I'll be like, no, you need, I'm like this book's cheerleader, but it's a really, really beautiful novel.
What was the title?
Sharks in the Time of Saviors.
Sharks in the Time of Saviors. Thank you.
And another favorite book that I just got that I'm rereading is Perma Red by Deborah Magpie Erling. It's a great novel. And she also knew my grandmother and is from Montana and just a phenomenal writer. Mhm.
I will just comment that I am going to get your book, and I think that it's going to be one that I'll probably be tempted to give away.
Oh, please do.
So,
Thank you.
so much. I just want to say, this isn't a question, I haven't thought of too many questions, but just a comment is, besides just saying that you write beautifully, I really applaud you for what it takes to share some of those passages of times that I know were fraught with anxiety and tenderness and all of that, to put yourself back in those places. For us, it is truly a gift. It's truly, truly a gift of the heart. And very grateful to have sat here and received it from you directly. And I last saw you again probably in the summer before her death. I was at her funeral, and you knew that clearly. But so your reading today filled in a piece of it. I can see like the legal pad and the large print and the screens enlarged this big so she could still do her work and look it out. And so it's a real gift to me, just even that much description of that time for you. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Agreement online, all of that. And lastly, Natasha is curious, actually, what helped you to make the time and stay focused over the long haul to finish Red Paint?
What helped me to stay focused? I just that I really needed to do it. Like, I think I just really had to do it. Like, I had spent a lot of time in, I feel like it doesn't, like I can't mention the accomplishment of finishing this book without also mentioning the epic failure that was the manuscript that came before. I spent several years writing this very sad, terrible, like intense book called Little Boats. And it was one of those early, like I'm in college and I'm exploring these things. And it was important, but it was also really hard. And I think, and it was like 470 pages intense. But I wrote that book and threw a lot of myself into it and came kind of undone in the process of it, was diagnosed with PTSD. I was hospitalized several times for fainting, like having these episodes, because going into some of those memories and just writing them all down was really reckless. And I didn't quite have the tools to like deal with the aftermath of unearthing some of these memories. And so when I finished it and, you know, graduated my MFA program, people were interested, like an agent or a publisher would like be like, oh, we want to read that. Oh, we love the first 30 pages, send us more. And that kept happening, but then they kept turning it down. And I feel like this is an important story for all artists, is that like rejection is fine. It's totally fine. But that kept happening. And meanwhile, I was also like dealing with this the diagnosis of PTSD and kind of putting the pieces of myself back together. And then finally I realized, I think they're onto something with like rejecting this book, because it wasn't the story I truly wanted to tell. I needed to write it all down before I got to where I arrived and was able to write Red Paint. But I think that's a very long-winded roundabout way to answer. I think that is what helped me write Red Paint, is that I truly like came to a place where I'm like, oh, I need to heal and I need to like get this book out of me. And I did. And I think that one thing that really helped also was throwing myself into the research. And like, of course I knew the things, the conversations from my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother, family, but it was really fun. I'm not much of a researcher, or I didn't think I was, but when learning about Kamsha and learning more about like, and going to like the historical society reference books and like looking at, like, I loved that part of it. And I feel like that kind of structure and direction kept me on task. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you
I
so
think
much.
That's gonna be it. Thank you. So thanks to everyone who came out this evening and to everyone out there in Zoom land. If you would like to buy books, it's going to be just out into the old lobby and to the right. Darby's will be at the table. Any special directions, instructions? No, just they take all forms of payment. So everybody grab your books, and if you can't buy one tonight, Darby's has them, and so does everybody else. Again, thank you so much, Sasha. Have a great evening, everyone.
You want to go down now?
All right,
We're not talking. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, no problem.